Strong Sheila.
All right, we are live. And this is Senate Health and Welfare. We're continuing our work today on S-197, and Katie, you're gonna walk briefly through a language proposal on 197, and then we're gonna turn to, we have a lot of testimony in the room, so we want to get to that.
Great.
So we'll try to avoid discussion on what's being presented, and we'll come back to it.
Katie McGlynn, Office of Legislative Counsel. I'll pull up the document. So last time we met, you had a few ideas for how to change the bill. I've tried to incorporate those changes into this draft. They're highlighted in yellow. One of the main changes is that you wanted some changes to the educational materials that would be provided by the health department, but you also wanted to look at some language that the bill on the House side was doing, which was banning the sale of all PFAS products, with the exception that the Department of Health could identify certain projects where PFAS was unavoidable. So what I have done is I have created a new chapter that's generally products containing PFAS. And we have tiered effective dates because you wanted the language about educational materials to take effect sooner than the complete ban on sale and distribution of products containing PFAS. So the first section of this new chapter is the definition section. And then the second section is a section on educational materials. And this would take effect, I think, July 1, 2024. I have to double check that. So the educational materials, the new language is that the department shall provide information to the public available electronically on the department's website and create public service announcements describing the health consequences of exposure to PFAS, including the prevalence of PFAS in private and public drinking water, any EPA guidelines on drinking water, maybe I should say PFAS in drinking water, the availability of the department's test for detecting PFAS in drinking water, and advice for reducing personal PFAS exposure. And then subsection B, the department is to provide information to healthcare providers available electronically on the department's website, describing the health consequences of exposure to PFAS, symptoms to PFAS exposure, diagnostic tests related to PFAS exposure, and any other related guidance documents produced by EPA and prevention agencies for toxic substances and disease registry. So that's the language on the educational materials that you landed on. And then we move to section 2, which is amending the same chapter that we just looked at a later date. So you're updating the definition section to include potentially added and the definition of manufacturer. And then there's a new section on a prohibition on the sale and distribution of products containing PFAS. So this is the language that was pulled out of the House bill. That a person shall not distribute, sell, offer for sale, or distribute in this state any product to which one or more PFAS has been intentionally added, unless the department has determined that the use of PFAS is a currently unavoidable use. That phrase, currently unavoidable use, is not defined. Subsection B, department is to maintain a list of products on its website that are exempt from A, meaning they're currently unavoidable use. And then in C, the section does not apply to the sale or resale of used products, and that's consistent with all of the other language on PFAS that has been adopted to date. Then you have a certificate of compliance. This should look very familiar because this is your compliance mechanism and the other PFAS statutes that you've worked on. That the AG may request a certificate of compliance from a manufacturer of a product sold in Vermont. Within 30 days after receipt of the AG's request for a certificate of compliance, the manufacturer shall provide the Attorney General with a certificate attesting that the manufacturer's product or products comply with the requirements of this chapter, or notify persons who are selling a product of the manufacturers in the state that the sale is prohibited because the product does not comply with the chapter, and submit to the AG a list of names and addresses of those persons notified. So that is identical language to what you have in statute and what you did in S 25. You have rulemaking language, you have penalty language that is identical to what is in statute and what you have adopted in S 25. Then you have repeals language. This language takes effect when section 2 takes effect with the ban on PFAS. And the idea is you don't need these more individualized statutes about different products, PFAS and different products, if you have a general ban on PFAS. What's not here is the firefighting foam and firefighting equipment, because that statute was more nuanced and had sort of a different structure. So it doesn't do exactly the same thing that this new language would do. And then you have your language about PFAS and pesticides that the other
Agriculture is looking at that. Right.
Sounds like they're interested in
I do know what untreated article seeds are for the public.
they're making some changes. And then we have our effective date. So the act takes effect July 1, 24, meaning that educational language takes effect July 1, 24. But then you have sections 2 and 3, the ban on sale and distribution and the corresponding repeals that takes effect July 1, 2030. And then the pesticides piece takes effect July 1, 25. And then renewing the bill on passage. So that is what where you were when we last met.
Okay, thank you. That's really helpful. And it's easier to consider, I think, for that, which Senator.
Just a comment, when we banned plastic bags, grocery bags, now every day I get in the mail a grocery bag from a veterans organization or somebody. How do we know that those things don't have PFAS in them? And I mean, just because we make a law doesn't mean that people are gonna abide by it. So what's the mechanism in this bill to, who's gonna be responsible for enforcing it?
I'm trying to remember what the underlying statute says, and Katie can help us with this, but I do know that there was a requirement, at least in the children's products piece, for the AG to do some consumer products division does some spot checking from time to time, and I don't know what that all is and how encompassing it is.
And this bill is the certificate of compliance, that the AG may request a certificate of compliance from a manufacturer.
I support it, obviously.
Yeah, I know,
I just
but
wanna know
it
how
is,
we
you're right,
find-
you get something in the mail, how do you know?
Right,
Including Amazon.
right. I don't even open it. I guess someone showed
Okay.
up there. Yeah.
All right, well, we do have folks here to testify on the bill and on PFAS, so I'm gonna go to Catherine Palin, who is here from the Automobile Alliance, Automotive Innovation Alliance Board. Thank you for being patient this morning, and I'm gonna have the committee go around and introduce themselves so that you get to know who we are, and then we'll have you introduce yourself and give us your testimony. So I'm Senator Ginny Lyons. I represent Chittenden Southeast.
Good morning, Senator Dave Weeks, representing Rutland County.
Senator Martine LaRock Bulick representing Chittenden Central.
Hi, good morning, everybody. I'm Senator Ruth Hardy from the Addison District.
Hey, good morning, I'm Senator Terry Williams, representing Rutland County also.
Okay, so thank you for being here. Please introduce yourself for the record and we'll listen to your testimony.
Sure, thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Lyons and committee members. My name is Catherine Palin. I'm a senior attorney and director of environmental policy at the Alliance for Automotive Innovation. We call ourselves Auto Innovators. Our organization represents practically all of the automakers that you might be familiar with in the US today, with the exception of Tesla. So we represent Toyota, GM, Ford, Subaru, all those guys. I direct all of our policy work for the trade association on PFAS and on other chemicals. I'd like to thank you guys for the opportunity to provide testimony today in opposition to the amended Senate Bill 197. which is well-intentioned legislation, but it would have a far-reaching and disruptive impact across the economy, in part because of its unrealistic timelines and the overly broad definitions. Our principal concern is the 2030 PFAS ban in products part of this legislation. I understand that it seeks to address the use of products that contain chemicals from the PFAS family, but it would, in effect, likely ban thousands of products from sale and distribution in Vermont, including motor vehicles and parts, absent the state undertaking a complex and timely regulatory process to evaluate and decide whether the specific PFAS usage in a specific product is deemed a currently unavoidable use as is currently written. To talk to you a little bit about PFAS use in the auto industry, as you, I think, probably will know, the expectations for today's automobiles are high, and the environments in which they must operate are harsh, from the coldest winter days to summer driving in Death Valley. Consumers expect that their car or truck will get them there safely. And the PFAS family of chemicals has helped provide resiliency in vehicles through the application of coatings and products that resist heat, oil, grease, and water. Those are the qualities that PFAS in our products provide and what make them durable vehicles. And they are imperative throughout the vehicles. The heat resistance qualities of PFAS allow flexible fuel lines to safely deliver gasoline to a hot engine without causing a fire. Heat resistance, along with protection from water intrusion, protects the integrity of wire looms, sensors, brake lines in a vehicle that allow us also to have our safety systems function. In addition to these safety benefits, these vehicles have drastically reduced emissions, in part because of the chemical and heat resistant properties that PFAS provide to gaskets and O-rings and engines, which are tightly sealed, and coatings on cylinder heads and hoses, which reduce fugitive gasoline vapor emissions. So nearly every automotive system depends on some type of PFAS chemical to provide a durable, reliable, safer, and cleaner product for consumers. In relation to some of the PFAS laws and regulations around the country and around the world, a few searches of available data have found that there are over 8 million parts from the vehicles industry that contain PFAS for current and past production vehicles. And there are over 250 applications of PFAS in the vehicle. Now, automakers and our suppliers, we consider the impacts of chemicals used to build today's vehicles very seriously. We are always looking for substitute compounds that can perform the same job with a lower environmental impact. And we've even recognized areas where we can reduce the use of PFAS chemicals in specific applications. For example, we've reduced or eliminated use of long-chain PFAS products, which are known to be harmful. Despite this, however, there are some uses that cannot be replicated by any other known chemical at this time. And the process for us of testing an alternative, validating its performance in the vehicle part, and then working that revision into the design and production of vehicles takes many years. So while we're confident that it is a rational discussion of PFAS uses in the auto industry would lead all parties to agree that their use is necessary and thereby reduce the chances of ill-considered regulation, disrupting the automobile market in Vermont, we do have to raise concerns that the process of seeking an exemption could be incredibly burdensome for automakers and for state regulators alike. So to raise just 2 points. First, even understanding the new EPA definition of PFAS that I have heard has been floated with relation to this bill. That's still a class of roughly 11 or 12,000 chemicals identified within that family. And we as an industry have had trouble working with that definition to date because EPA has failed to provide a singular authoritative list of all those chemicals. Second, the bill is currently drafted would apply not only to consumer products, but also to product components, which for our industry, we generally interpret to mean not only vehicles, but also the millions of service and replacement parts that are placed into circulation in the economy to maintain and repair past production and current production vehicles. Because if you look at the auto industry alone, our vehicles have about 30,000 identifiable differentiated parts sourced from hundreds or thousands of suppliers across the world. The potential obligation in order to seek an exemption for our products of analyzing and collecting the exact usages of each PFAS chemical for each of those 30,000 parts on a vehicle would be a monumental task. And this may need to be replicated. Is that for each different model? Is that for each different engine family? You know, is there a separate application per vehicle or per part? At this time, it isn't clear. And so because these 30,000 individual parts comprising an automobile are sold separately to service and maintain them, this process might also need to be repeated for individual parts, each and every part on each and every vehicle. So we think that there is a potential here for a dramatically burdensome obligation when it comes to getting a currently unavoidable use exemption for vehicles and parts that have critical uses of PFAS in them. We also think it's worth considering when we talk about our industry that the vast majority of consumers are not going to have any contact with those vehicle parts, engine O-rings, brake and gas lines, et cetera. And the service professionals that work on vehicles use masks and gloves in the course of their day. In addition, when it comes to vehicles, they are one of the most highly recycled consumer products, with our entire industries based around that practice. And an estimate we have of over about 85% of the vehicle being recycled at end of life. So from our perspective, the true exposure pathways of automotive usage are relatively limited. We also think that PFAS should be regulated based on risk. The universe of PFAS chemicals that would be banned under SB 197 would be tremendously wide, as stated, over 11,000 substances. We find generally that some of these definitions are without discernment regarding the actual levels of risk and concern to humans and the environment of these chemicals. The bill seems to ignore that the broad use of the term PFAS incorporates different physical, environmental, chemical, and biological properties of these substances. Not all PFAS chemistries are the same, and we believe they should not be managed as such under a single class. And as a result, we think that this bill is a little overly broad, lacking in scientific justification, and has the potential to impose an onerous obligation on the auto industry with minimal benefit for the public. As stated, kind of or implied above, this phase out would take place in 2030, and we think that this proposed timeline is likely unachievable for the auto industry. While there's maybe a long window for a lot of other. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, it sounds like you're going back to and be a little bit redundant. So if you and so the time is getting long here. So
Yeah.
if you finish up, and then it would be extremely helpful for you to send your testimony in, so we have it on our webpage.
Yep, I'll quickly make a few points. One is that 6 years is not a lot of time for the auto industry. We're designing vehicles now that will be in production in 2030, and to test those replacements, verify them, and all that sort of thing in that time is really probably not possible for us. Another thing I would point you to consider is that in other states, they have struggled to implement rules like this. Maine was the first state to pass legislation like this in 2021. They've already amended it once and are potentially going to amend it again because of the difficulties in implementing it. And in the state of California, which is usually, you know, a kind of at the vanguard of environmental action, the governor actually vetoed a similar bill, citing concerns over cost and duplication of federal efforts. And we do plan to file written testimony after this. So I'd like to thank you for your time and consideration of our views, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Oh, thank you very much. That is helpful, and I know that we have heard about Maine and California, and I'm sure we'll hear again about their experiences. So we appreciate your being here. I think what we'll do is we'll move along. One of the things that you said, I think that is critically important, is that most of the inclusion of PFAS are away from the driver and the passengers in the vehicle. So it's not something that's spread on the seats, for example. these slippery seats, but anyway, so that's helpful, so thank you for that. Thank you for all your testimony and your time this morning.
Yep.
So now we're going to move to Bill Briscoe.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
I appreciate the welcome change of pace and coming before you talk about a chemical bill. So,
Unusual.
yeah, I know. Well, you have to, expand your boundaries, so. For the record, William Driscoll with Associated Industries of Vermont, representing primarily the manufacturing sector. I appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about this legislation. And I'm going to speak primarily to the proposed amendment.
Okay.
And I can maybe just say a few words about the underlying bill, if time allows. I think the previous witness gave you a good sense of some of the main concerns that we have with this particular approach. Right off the bat, having a 2030 deadline for all products, basically. I think it's safe to say that most industry is looking to find alternatives to PFAS already. And some products lend themselves to achieving that sooner than others. So having both the length of time is relatively short, and also there's going to be wide variation in terms of the achievability of that time frame for different products. So that's the concern. I think the approach taken in the past and currently with S20 in the previous legislature and S25 in the current one, where you're looking at street products where you can really look at how can we make these goals achievable and match it up to the circumstances of those particular products. I think that's a better approach. I think if you look at the states that have tried to look at low-hanging fruit or the priority products, and then take a more step-by-step approach toward widening that net, I think Vermont's actually captured most of those products so far. Even just looking at those two previous bills I mentioned, there may be some additional specific ones that can be looked at. I think on that note of timing and feasibility, I would just flag a couple of, I think, lessons that we've learned from looking to comply with some of the legislation that's been passed in Vermont, with the experience in Maine, whatnot. I think it would be good, just as a general principle, to include provisions addressing the sell-through of existing inventories, and also allowing specific and explicit authority to, whether it's Department of Environmental Conservation or the Department of Health, to be able to allow for variances or somehow be able to make adjustments to deadlines if you just run into this reality dilemma of not just physically not being able to comply in time. There should be some flexibility that doesn't require necessarily revisiting legislation. I am concerned about what could be a bottleneck for allowing exemptions under the bill as it's drafted. I'm sure the Department of Health can speak to capacity issues. And there's also, again, this is another case of how have we approached this previously in Vermont, and what the pros and cons are. This basically takes the approach that you're banned unless you get an exemption, right? So that creates quite a bit of work to do, and then the consequences of not being able to do that work in a timely manner could be a bit of a compliance train wreck. What has been done in other chemical legislation in the past here, not every single one, but it's been common, is that it's said, and in other states it's also very common, is you would say have an alternatives review. So you make the determination that there is in fact an alternative that's safe, affordable, effective, and then you have the ban go into place in a reasonable time. And that changing it in that direction, I think you can avoid basically a bottleneck or congestion where you're not able to just simply process exemptions in a timely way. So that would be something to think about. I think other states have looked at having more upfront exemptions for certain federally regulated products, things that are related to health and safety. Again, I think dipping into internal components is a bit of a departure from the way we've approached these things here in Vermont that obviously adds to potential complications as previous witness kind of gave one example, spoke to. So that'd be something to think about as well. Some of these issues also do come down to the definition of PFAS or covered PFAS. I would suggest that the current approach in Vermont is overly broad. I think it's been good to see that we're kind of talking about that more and really thinking about the need to maybe come up with a better definition that makes a more manageable universe, doesn't bring in PFAS, which frankly are not of the same level of concern for health impacts or things that we're not. We do try to reach out and sort of coordinate various industry stakeholder groups and companies to try to come up with common approaches to these issues. And so we're definitely sharing the proposal that the Department of Health presented last week. I think it's definitely a step in the right direction, but we may try to talk with A&R and health and you folks about potential further tweaks that we might recommend. There have been a couple of states that have started to sort of hone their definition. I think Delaware, Virginia, West Virginia, and some other states have made some changes. We could look at OECD countries. There's some other approaches out there that are worth kind of looking at to further massage maybe some recommendations. And it would be good, frankly, if it does nothing else, and that's always an option. Maybe this legislation can make some changes throughout Vermont statute to maybe update PFAS wherever it is. We do come to a consensus about what.
Small job.
Yeah, well, I won't, we do have concerns about pesticide provisions primarily on sort of the practical
I'll let
realities.
you take that down
Yeah.
home.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
So I would just say then kind of wrapping up a bit, I believe that this was already raised previously, and I'm sure you'll hear more about it this morning. But there is an effort going on currently with NUMOA, the Northeast Waste Management Organization Association. I
Yep.
don't know if I got that quite
Right, Matt Chapman.
Close, yeah,
the leader in that.
good enough. They are looking to come up with model legislation to look at regulating PFAS in products in a way that could hopefully have a regional, that's New England, New York, New Jersey. That's an ongoing process. I think there have been positive, in our view, positive changes to the sort of working draft. I think there are issues left to still be worked out. I think revisiting, just like we're starting the conversation about definitions here, I think it would be good to re-inject that into that process. So I'm not saying that where they're at now is a great model. We should definitely adopt it. But I think seeing that process through, seeing if we can really come up with something where there's much broader consensus behind something that maybe a region could look at would be helpful. Particularly with this specific approach, we have Maine, we have Minnesota. I believe I don't think anybody else has done something quite like this. Maine is revisiting a lot of things. I think it's fair to say Minnesota may well find itself in the same position shortly. So between letting NUMOA kind of work through its process and letting see if the dust settles in Maine and Minnesota before we go down a similar path, I think it would be prudent.
Thank you. And can we get something in writing?
Absolutely.
That'd be great. Thank you. We've taken some time and thought to this, and we appreciate it. So, looking at the people who are here in the room and on the screen, and I'm wondering, the Department of Health or the ANR want to go first?
You can do one more. All right,
I mean, we did hear from Sarah recently on her interest in the definition. So let's hear from you, Matt.
Sure. So for the record, Matt Chapman, I'm the Director of the Waste Management Division for the Department of Environmental Conservation. I would start by saying we are conceptually supportive of the concept that the bill has put out there. I think, eliminating PFAS in consumer products is a high priority of the Department of Environmental Conservation. the approach that's put out in this particular bill is very problematic and will be difficult to implement and administer. And I'm happy to go through in as much detail as the committee wants me to, but I do think it's probably just if I can give you the detail in writing
Sure.
and just touch briefly in knowing the committee is short on time.
Well, here's what would be very helpful is
Sure.
how would you fix the language?
Well,
What would you suggest?
Sure.
To keep us moving along, but at the same time, not send us into the main or debacle.
So I think I guess I would say, I think there are a number of fairly significant policy issues the committee should look into and make decisions on. And then I think the committee would benefit significantly from hearing from at least Vermont manufacturers around the practicality of using those in a Vermont setting. So I mean, this is likely to affect a number of Vermont businesses. And I think,
Global Foundries for one.
Global Beta Technologies, there's a number of folks out there who are manufacturers in the state of Vermont whom this will have an impact on. And I think, when we work on it as, both in my work at A&R and my work through NMOA, we're trying to come up with a scheme that sends market signals to those industries that they need to be changing their processes, but also gives them enough time and creates a flexible enough process so that we know we're not going to be able to eliminate PFAS in everything. We're trying to eliminate it in most things, and certainly where it's not critical. And so I'll flag a few things that I think you need to focus your attention on. And I'll provide more detail in writing. But I think that, I think the definition of intentionally added, you should consider whether it's overly narrow. The definition of intentionally added, the way it's constructed right now, is only when it has a functional purpose in the product. But that leaves things out like AstroTurf, where it's used as a manufacturing process aid, or things like pesticides that have been contaminated by being placed in fluorinated containers. So those are things that need to be thought about as you go through this. I think we're going to do a broad scoped proposal. You really need to delve into the definition of PFAS. I mean, obviously we put forward an option. I know there's a diversity of opinions on the agency's collective proposal. I think you need to delve into the definition of products and specifically what constitutes a consumer product under this. I think consumer product probably needs to be defined. Doesn't include things like aircraft that I could buy or medical imaging equipment that UVM or a hospital could buy. I mean, these are, I think, clarifications that are going to be really important, because the more complex the product, the harder it becomes for them basically to deal with the component part of the process, which is really, I think, where other jurisdictions have struggled. And that we need to make sure that the bill has sufficient tools to allow manufacturers to figure out whether components contain PFAS or not. So how can you give them tools to ask upstream manufacturers whether their products contain PFAS? And frankly, how can you create a safe haven if they've done things that they reasonably could do and they think there's no PFAS, but there is, right? I think it's just the streams of component products are global, and the ability for people to comply is complex, and we need to acknowledge that in our process. So in the ban itself, the ban applies to persons, which expands it beyond those who manufacture PFAS containing products. So my use probably applies to retailers, wholesalers, and others. And I don't know whether that was intentional or whether that was not.
I'm trying to think about that, because I think in the statute, persons and corporations are equating.
Well, they are, but I think the question is who is the one who's
Yeah.
responsible for certifying the product doesn't contain PFAS?
Got it.
Is it the person who is selling the product, the person who's making the product, or everyone? And the way I read it right now, it's everyone.
Okay.
I think it was touched upon, but the unavoidable use determination components of the bill, there's not policy guidance on what constitutes.
Unavoidable use.
Right, what is an unavoidable use of PFAS? What does the committee intend that to be? Is there a process by which health or A&R goes through to make those determinations? I would be surprised if there aren't tens of thousands of requests for an unavoidable use determination. This is going to be a significant resource drain on the Department of Health or Natural Resources, whoever this ends up living with. I think the last sort of comment that I have is that there's an exception for the resale of used products. I think you should consider how recycled products are treated. Unfortunately, the inks and papers, for example, that we have in commerce today have PFAS in them. Unless we start over and get everything out and clean the equipment, we're going to be stuck with PFAS in the recycling stream for a long period of time. What do we do about replacement parts, right? So again, I think an example that was kind of given, if a car has one part that's PFAS containing after 2030 that fails, all right, you have to get rid of the car, right? So I don't think that's the intent, but I think we should be clear on what we're doing as far as the proposal. And I guess to sort of close, I think all of these issues are issues that have a solution if given time and the ability to work with stakeholders to work through how to manage through them. And I would offer the Agency of Natural Resources is more than willing to conduct some form of stakeholder process to try and bring interested persons together, build off what regional organizations in Maine and Minnesota have done to come back to the committee with a proposal that tries to come up with greater clarity and suggestions for the committee on where you should go with respect to each of these sort of flagged areas.
So would that include your organization, Neola?
I mean, I am happy to try and pull in my colleagues as much as I can pull them in, but I mean, I think it's in state government, it's A&R and the Department of Health, but I think it's also trying to bring in folks from the manufacturing sector and frankly, the environmental and public health advocacy community to have a conversation about what makes sense.
Can we get something in writing from you?
Absolutely.
That'd be great.
All right.
Thank you. That's all. So, quick question.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, the stakeholder process
Yes.
and your request for time. I hear you. Is this, are you suggesting something like, are you talking about the next couple of weeks, or are you talking about before next session kind of thing?
So
What's the
I guess I
time?
would say I've been working on this for a couple of years now. These are big policy recommendations, especially when you expand it out to the whole sort of consumer
Yeah.
product category.
Yeah,
I would ask the committee give us until January 15th of next year and come back with a set of recommendations.
that's what I was thinking you were saying.
Yeah,
but I
thank you,
wanted to
thank you for
clarify.
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
All right.
All right. Who's next? I think, Sarah, we did hear from Sarah. Did she have something further that she wants to?
If the committee's Brendan Atwood, Department of Health Policy Director. So Dr. Owen is prepared to speak to the definition of PFAS, if that's helpful. Otherwise, I'm happy to speak to section 2.
You want to speak as well?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Why don't you come up first, and then we'll move on to definition, and then we'll go to Kyle Bennett, who actually was here before.
Great.
Well,
Good morning. Thank you, Madam Chair and committee members. Again, for the record, Brendan Atwood, Policy Director with the Department of Health. Thank you for providing the department with an opportunity to comment on this bill. I want to start by saying, echoing Matt's comments, that we agree with the intent of this bill to regulate and reduce exposures to PFAS. We also agree that focusing on PFAS comprehensively is a sensible approach. That being said, we go to some questions as well as a few comments about sections 1 and 2, which I can dive into now. Starting with section 1 first, we appreciate the inclusion of much of the department's recommended language in this section. We just want to note that for a public service announcement, depending on what that means and how it's meant to be interpreted, that may require some funding. We can certainly put things on our website and put out information through our current methods, but if you're going to do a broader campaign, that would require some funding to do as well. Moving to section 2, the reason amendments here do raise some questions for us in terms of how to interpret some of the language along the lines that Matt noted as well. They also raise some concerns around implementation and the department's capacity to take on this work. So as you know, section 2 tasks the Department of Health with determining which use of PFAS in a product is unavoidable. The first question we have along the same lines that Matt noted is how the term unavoidable is meant to be interpreted. I do think, however, even with some more clarity on that definition, while the department can offer insights on the health impacts associated with PFAS exposure, we simply do not have that expertise in-house to make determinations about whether the use of PFAS in a product is unavoidable. And so we would recommend perhaps an advisory committee that could look into this with representation across disciplines beyond just public health. In terms of implementation, feasibility is also a question for us. As others have noted, we would expect that the list of exempt products could easily number in the tens, if not hundreds of thousands. Especially considering that a single product, as noted, may contain thousands of components for which an assessment may be required for each of those components. This process would require a significant amount of work, both technical and administrative, for the department to take on, which of course equates to the need for more staff and funding, and perhaps even funding for an IT system to house all these extensive lists. So in
That's
short,
an inexpensive.
right, yeah, easy fix, as we know, yeah. So implementing this would likely be expensive and complicated undertaking for the department, even if we have in-house expertise to make these determinations. So in summary, I just want to say that the department appreciates the committee's goals to reduce PFAS exposure. We support that goal. As Matt noted, we're happy to continue to work with the committee on ways to achieve that goal. However, there are some unanswered and important questions left on the table in terms of implementation and the department's capacity and ability to take on that work.
Good testimony. Just a question on public service announcements.
Yeah.
Can you give an example of where you do that now? And then also, do you have any kind of rough costs, something like that?
I would have to follow up with you on that. I'm not intimately involved with communications. I think, depending on what the committee's preference was, we can formulate a campaign around that. But, if it's putting things in tweets, you do that without cost. If it's a broader campaign where we have to purchase advertisements and things like that, I can certainly get you those costs.
Yeah, so the PSA is something I inserted into your language. I admit, so public service announcement. So any information you can get us on costs is helpful. Yeah. One public service announcement, repeated X number of times, just something.
Absolutely. Happy to do that.
Thank you for your testimony. One thing is, I think it's ANR is putting out, notices, letters to people that have wells that, they want to test, just to, maybe if you could include that in the PSA also, that the importance of complying with, allowing the state. A lot of people that talk to me, they don't want the state checking the water. So it's gonna benefit you, we're not doing it, so.
We'd be happy to. We already have some information on our website about the importance of well testing, but we'll be happy to amplify it on that.
And the well drillers are good about, and when they go back to check on pumps and things, they're good about suggesting that, I think. What's the well drillers are? They're always good guys. They help us with our groundwater assessment and stuff. Thank you for that.
Very well.
Yeah. So Sarah, you're here. Thank you. Are you here? There she is.
Yes, good morning.
All right, I should say Dr. Owen, welcome. And you were going to talk a little bit about definition, I think.
Sure. So I was in.
Go ahead. You've been here before on this, but this is helpful.
Yes, so Sarah Owen, state toxicologist with the health department. I shared on Friday some suggested language for narrowing down the scope of a definition. I think as the bill becomes broader to include more consumer products, that definition becomes more and more important to make it something that can be workable for programs. I don't really have much to add on the definition, but I'm happy to answer questions if you have them.
So is there a difference between the definition that you're suggesting and the definition that ANR has suggested? And how do they?
So let me clarify something.
Please,
The
yeah.
definition that ANR suggested.
For the
was,
record.
For the record, Matt Chapman, he's Director of Waste Management for Richmond. We, as often happens this time of year, we were working at the same time right before testimony happened. And so the definition evolved and Dr. Owens, the one that she put forward to the committee is sort of the agreed upon. It's a position.
That's the one that relies on CFR 45, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. All right, so for some clarity then, it's the Department of Health and the Agency of Natural Resources agree on the definition?
The agency.
Yeah, okay. All right. Any questions for Sarah Owen? All right, good. I wanted to clarify that, and it was helpful to do that. So I think we also have Kyla Bennett back. Here you are. Thank you for being here, and you're listening in on our testimony, and we know that your expertise in this area, and would welcome your comments on the bill as it's proposed.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me here again. Dr. Kyla Bennett from Public Employees for Environmental Responsibility. I have a PhD in ecology and also a law degree. A couple of things after listening to the testimony this morning. First of all, I agree with Matt 100% about the intentionally added portion of the bill. We've been encouraging states to use language like intentionally used and or knowingly contains or manufactured. That would cover things like artificial turf, where it's not an ingredient that's added necessarily. Sometimes it is, but it's often from the manufacturing process and they know that it's in there. And it also would cover the fluorinated containers issue that leaches PFAS into plastics and then the contents. So the intentionally added does provide a loophole for a number of PFAS uses. I do take issue with Catherine Palin's testimony about the no exposure from the automotive uses. First of all, there is PFAS on the upholstery in cars. It's on the dashboard. It's on the outside. People are touching it all the time. They're breathing it. There are a lot of people who change their own oil or work on their own cars, so they will have exposure that way. There's exposure when there's a car accident. There's an exposure when the car is at end of life. So there is a lot of exposure. And while I understand the essential use, there is some great language out there. There was a 2023 article that I'm happy to send you talking about this essential use approach for PFAS regulation. And what the EU does and what they're suggesting that we do in the US is say that chemicals of concern like PFAS should be used only in cases in which their function in specific products is necessary for health, safety, or the functioning of society, and when feasible alternatives are unavailable. And the burden of that, proving that, should be on the manufacturer, not on the state of Vermont. And I'm happy to send you that paper, but I think it's a really good way to grasp that concept of essential use.
Has anyone used that definition legislatively, to your knowledge?
Yes, people are starting to try to include that. So there is a bill pending in Massachusetts where I live on, similar to yours. New York has banned a lot of PFAS in products. It's not just Maine. People are starting to get there and they are starting to try to use that essential use concept. And as I said, it is used in Europe. Also, Ms. Palin said that aside from saying there's no exposure, she talked about, it was an industry talking point that there are good PFAS and bad PFAS. And while it is true that there are some PFAS that appear to be less toxic than others, the problem is that we only have toxicity information on 130 of these PFAS. And the absence of evidence is not the same thing as the evidence of absence. In other words, just because we don't have that toxicity information doesn't mean they're safe. It just means we don't know yet. So using the precautionary principle in a matter of clear public health danger, I think is necessary. And so a broad definition, I think is a good one, because every year that we wait and continue to allow PFAS in these products is dooming an entire another generation of Vermonters to PFAS contamination. It's contaminating our water, our soil, our food supply, our recycling stream. Plastics are all filled with PFAS now because of contamination. So I really think it's important to not delay this anymore. I did love the PSA, the education component of this. I think it's a great idea. And I just wanted to point out that there are available a number of things already that the state of Vermont can link to. For example, the NHANES did a big study on PFAS and how it affects people and how to test your blood and what health effects you might see. So you could link to places like NHANES, and also Silent Spring Institute, which is a nonprofit based in Massachusetts. They're a breast cancer initiative, but they have a really nice graphing tool on their website, which is free. So you can input your own PFAS blood data, and it'll tell you whether you have to be concerned and where you fall on the map of everybody in the US who's been tested, and input their data. So there are things available. So it may not be as expensive as you think if you can take advantage of and link to these other sources. So that's all I have. I'm happy to answer.
Part of the expense is actually renting time and space on the TV stations or the putting it on the web. But yeah, obviously getting it produced is important, and having access to those things sounds like a great idea. Thank you. So question for you then. We've heard from our state toxicologist and also ANR on an agreed to definition for the bill. And I'm thinking that you have seen that as a result of testimony that was given or not.
I haven't seen the new definition. So is it the OECD definition or is it something different?
It's something different. It was placed on our website under Dr. Owen's name the last time we took testimony on the bill.
I'll take a look at it and be happy to provide my thoughts in writing if you'd like.
That would be helpful. And your testimony today in writing again would be very helpful. Appreciate it. Yeah.
Yep.
Question.
Just, I remember back when we had S25 in here. I think it sounds like the majority of the problems that every state has is upstream.
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk to our federal delegation about introducing something.
I know. I think Senator Sanders in the past, and I don't know whether it's currently in, has introduced TSCA legislation. So we should find out.
Well, here we are a year later.
Well, he did that many years ago. We talked about it, but I don't know whether it's still in the.
There is no pending federal bill on PFAS and products. There is a federal congressional PFAS task force, but they have no bill pending on products right now.
Just a follow-up. Now, remember, as far as outdoor clothing for inclement weather,
yeah,
we talked about exempting them to 2027, but I'm thinking at the time this is going to be good for woolen products and goose grease. Because Gore-Tex.
We could go back to growing merino sheep.
That's right.
Yeah.
So there's already alternatives. There's DWR that is PFAS free. So I just bought from Keen. I bought a pair of boots that are waterproof and no PFAS. I buy all of my rain gear from Jack Wolfskin, which has a fluorine free. So because there are available alternatives, it seems to me that we don't need the Gore-Tex if we have something that's already, and that's part of that essential use concept. And again, I'll send you the link to that article when I submit my written testimony. But if there's an alternative that's available and it works, then nobody should have the excuse of continuing to use PFAS or fluorinated products.
Al Gore won't support that, but.
You're getting worse and worse.
I am.
I don't get that joke.
Cortex.
Oh,
Okay. Wow. Any other questions for Dr. Bennett while we have her here? Thank you very much, and we may reach out again as we move forward with the bill. Appreciate it.
Anytime. Thank you so much. And thank you for doing this. It's very important work.
Yeah, thank you. All
Thank
right. So is there any other comment that folks would like to make? I know now, Matt, you've offered a study group, and I don't know how my committee feels like putting this into a working group. We're really interested in taking some steps forward, so we'll have to talk about this as we go ahead, but I also understand the complexity and the huge task that's in the bill.
I'll use my bully pulpit to
No,
voice some frustration.
yes.
And I mean, my committee mates will know what I'm gonna talk about, but I'm a little loath to, give time and resources and such to industry to work around this issue when we were very quick to write legislation about PCBs in schools, putting the onus on our school districts to clean up their act with money that we don't have and with a lack of structure and guidance and guideposts. So I just want to voice that. I think it's important that we try to be consistent when it comes to trying not to poison our people and our kids. Leave it at that.
And there's an analogy there.
Just one other thing, what the doctor just said, if I know that there are products that are out there, regardless of, what they cost, that I can use in place of garments that are, have PFAS, I would buy it. And maybe we need to start putting that products out there. You might end up with some.
Remember, in the bill, we started out with having our public entities purchase things that are PFAS free. How can we do that is the question. So how do we know? How does anyone know that the police car that's being purchased doesn't have PFAS on the upholstery? How does someone know that the chairs that are being bought for committee rooms or conference rooms are without PFAS? So those questions still haven't been answered. We still haven't answered the question about public purchase, using public and the government.
Just one last little anecdote. We took all of the chairs, we being the Burlington School District, all of our chairs out of our auditorium and had each and every one stripped of its material and replaced with PCB and PFAS free fabric. So it can be done.
But it was the cost of the.
To the cost of the school district and hence the Vermont taxpayer, but
if you had known ahead of time, then
that's even better.
Then if that's what we're saying was in the bill. In the bill is that notice somehow to understand what you're purchasing ahead of time. So this is the conundrum.
So generally I support the concept of the bill as I think most folks are supporting it. Do think, given Senator Buick's point, that we need a thoughtful transition, not just a knee-jerk reaction, as we may have overreacted to not well thought out the transition in relation to PCBs became it remains alarmist. I do like Matt Chapman's recommendation to understand the problem and to have experts come up with recommendations on the transition. Yeah, the transition seems completely appropriate, but it needs to be well thought out, not just trying to get a hit, a crossover date or what have you. That's my.
No, I understand what you're saying. Yeah, okay. So let's let this percolate a little bit and we can have some conversations with folks inside and outside of the committee. And then we'll come back and see, maybe there's some recommendations we can make to Katie about what we think a transition is. I think there's a lot of interest in having a date certain. I mean, we can't just have a transition that says, come back and we're gonna do this all over again. That's not what we are about. So, what kind of definition is? Any other thoughts or questions? All right, so we're gonna